Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Taco Movie Talks. I am here with Film Junkie, aka Ethan, whose channel is linked down below, which you should check out. He's got a great series on Chinatown by Roman Polanski, which, if you've watched that movie, I think you would very, very much enjoy his review. And he also has short films of his own for all of you, what do they call it, cinephiles. I think you would like to check it out. Ethan, thank you for joining.
Always my pleasure.
This was a really great idea by you, for people who are really into movies. You might have heard that Jean-Luc Godard has recently passed, and for people who are not aware, he was very, very influential in the French New Wave movement, and he was also very influential in cinema as a whole. And I think he influenced a lot of what we see in modern filmmaking. I think a lot of great directors were inspired by him. And I guess, Ethan, from watching the movies that we watched, do you kind of feel like that is a true statement and that he is very, very inspirational, even nearly 60 years after these movies came out?
Oh, absolutely. He's definitely a huge inspiration on many filmmakers today. Very because he's very indie. He's very against the grain, very rebellious, and it's a behavior that bleeds into his films, similar to how it bleeds into films even to this day. Um, he is just he's definitely a rambunctious guy. There's no doubt about it. And the his passing to me was basically the passing of the French New Wave movement, because he was one of the last French New Wave filmmakers who was still alive, and unfortunately passed away.
It's so crazy for him to, pretty much be one of the flag bearers of the movement at the beginning of it and to be the last holdout. So I was so down to do this episode because the movies I had seen, I liked so much prior to this. I was very much into watching more of him. And you're right. The rebellious nature is really clear, and I think the two movies that we are going to be covering, because it's there's a lot of roles in cinema, and he seems to be breaking all of them in both of these movies.
Yes. I would like to mention that for a long time, the only movie of his that I've seen was Breathless.
Which is a classic, for
Yeah,
sure.
a classic that I wasn't able to get into, unfortunately. Um, but I sat down and I watched a lot more of his filmography, and I didn't love all of them, but I could definitely see a lot of that influence shine.
Yeah, I think he shares a specific characteristic that a lot of great directors have, and that is that he is very prophetic and very profound in what he tries to get across in his movies. I saw that in both of these, but how about you, Ethan?
Yeah, I saw it in both of these as well. I'd say they aren't as effective as my personal favorite Godard film, which is Vivre sa vie.
Mm.
I thought that movie was powerful, funny, and I think it was the perfect. It was basically the perfect Godard experience, in my opinion. But I think these two movies are definitely a good representation of what he was all about.
Yeah. One of the movies that we watch, so just so that people watching know, the two movies we're going to be covering is Weekend and Pierre Le Fou. I thought Pierre Le Fou was a lot like Viva Sa Vie, if I'm saying the title right. I might be misremembering.
Vivier Civi, yeah.
Do you kind of agree with that? And did you maybe enjoy it just as much because it was a little bit similar to that?
Uh, I'd say filmmaking wise, I think they're very, very different. Vivier Civi almost drowns in its black and white. It's
Mm-hmm.
very somber. It's a very depressing tone. And Pierrot Le Fou is very bright, vivid colors.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of makes you glad to be alive almost. Um, but I think, well, because Anna Karina is in it, who is also in Vivier Civi,
Mm-hmm.
and she plays a kind of a sort of femme fatale style character,
Mm-hmm.
and not like Vivier Civi. I'm curious what you think. What like similarities that Vivier Civi and Pierrot Le Fou have? Because I'm curious.
So I, despite the fact that the chapters in Pierre Le Fou were kind of not super meaningful, I think they even repeated some chapters and then started to go in reverse order. That kind of structure to how the story was told and how it would kind of jump time spans, I guess, was maybe the major similarity that I saw between them. But you brought up some really good differences between them because it is like a celebration of life with Pierre Le Fou, despite the ending, whereas
Yeah.
Vivre Sa Vie is very, very kind of depressing and bleak.
Yeah.
One thing I will say about Pierre Le Fou, before we kind of give a deep dive analysis, is the two movies I had seen of Godard prior to these two was Breathless and Vivre Sa Vie, and I thought Pierre Le Fou combined kind of the best actors from both movies
Yeah.
with this cast. I really like the cast of that movie.
Oh yeah. Yeah. As much as I didn't love Breathless, I think Jean-Paul Belmondo is really great as like a knockoff Humphrey Bogart.
See, I'm glad you kind of put a name to it because in my head while I was watching him, I was trying to think. He seemed very much like a throwback, like that kind of prototypical leading man, and I was like trying to put my finger on who he reminded me of, and I'm glad you
Mhm.
kind of put a name to it. Humphrey Bogart, myself, I'm not super duper familiar with, but I think there has to be something to that, like, in the
Very
it
tough guy sort of role.
exactly.
He's he's very he's kind of just swaggerish. I would say um
Yeah.
very much like a your average like gentleman, but with an alcohol problem, I guess.
Yeah. Like he has an attitude, but he's kind of does his own thing, like devil may care, but stylish. And I think it just kind of ran in my head. I wonder how popular he was and if he was like a bona fide superstar in France
Mhm.
from the roles that he had. And I also kind of wondered, like, culturally, if their movie stars are, as lauded as we have in America, like our movie stars.
Mhm.
Just kind of food for thought. I would wonder if that is the case in France.
Yeah.
And I guess the same goes for Godard and whether it's like if the immense respect that American audiences have when they discover him is also, I guess, reciprocated in his home country.
Hmm.
Going back, Ethan, our previous episode was about the French extremity movement, and now we're covering the new French wave movement, who is, our main player today is Jean-Luc Godard. But which, I guess, movement do you appreciate more? I know perhaps you might not have seen a ton of films from both movements, but do you have a preference?
Oh, French New Wave, easily.
Yeah.
There's I don't think there's a single film from the French extremity movement that I loved. There are multiple films from the French New Wave movement that I adore. Vivre sa vie is one. Uh, Francois Truffaut's The 400 Blows is a masterpiece as well. I also adore Hiroshi Mon Amour by Alain Resnais, um, among others. But you get the picture. Is that I think there are a couple of absolutely phenomenal movies from the French New Wave movement, but from the French extremity, I think they pushed the envelope a little too far.
I can definitely understand that, and even though my taste might inch closer to that style, I think I agree with you in that French New Wave was my preferred as well.
Yeah, I will say though, I will say um, that one interesting thing is that I think French New Wave and French extremity are pretty similar at the end of the day, though, at least for their time. They were very rambunctious. They were very against the grain for their time. They were very violent. They were very sexual, and they follow a similar path in that regard.
That's a really really good point that you brought up, because I think watching this now, it's, as with all things, it feels slightly more tame in comparison. But I I think you look at a lot of 60s movies, and I mean they're kind of pushing the envelope, and this is mid to late 60s, these two movies. I think it's 65 and 67, so things are
Yep.
starting to kind of go towards this direction, but there
Hmm.
is a good amount of violence. There's a lot of violence, arguably for the time, and
Oh yeah.
very free when it comes to the sexual nature of it. So like
Yeah.
that's a really good point that you brought up, that they were pushing the bounds of what cinema was and could be, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I kind of want to ask you, because admittedly the French New Wave I've only had exposure through Godard, and I don't know if it's just Godard who did this or if this was kind of indicative of French New Wave. But as a whole, were they setting out to kind of go against what normal cinema was doing at the time and taking a lot of chances?
Oh yeah. All of them were. Whether it was Truffaut, whether it was Varda, or Alan Rene, or people like that, or Louis Malle. I think all of them tried to push the envelope in their own way, and I think Godard was probably the one who pushed the envelope the furthest.
Okay.
But I think everyone was trying to in their own way.
And I guess the follow up question would be, as a student of film and an aspiring filmmaker, what are some of the takeaways that you get from watching Godard and a lot of people who advanced the French New Wave movement?
Well, to me, I think the best thing for a filmmaker can have is that he can have full control over his film, and
Mm,
has him or her have full control over their film. And what is great about that is obviously you can make it your own style and put your stamp on it, put your name on it, and Godard certainly does that because he has films that are more unconventionally edited and very they have flashy texts. They
mm.
have very introspective camera work, whether it's with the framing or just lingering on certain shots. He had his stamp on it, whether the case in any department of the film, he had his stamp on it.
Yeah. Just to strengthen the statement that you just said, the four movies I've seen by him are very distinct and they are different, yet you can tell that it's the same artist who is creating them because of the kind of certain things that he injects into his films. And looking at that in films nowadays, I think it's more so a problem, kind of what we call factory films.
Yeah,
And
corporate products.
exactly. And the people who maybe don't search profit as their main objective and look for creative freedom and to be able to have that full control that you were talking about are the people who are creating the stuff that I think is going to last long term. So it's neat to kind of see that mentality at its roots, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it makes you, I mean, to your knowledge, was there ever really a time period that predates this French New Wave in trying to do that? Where directors,
Possibly Italian neorealism.
okay,
That's another famous movement where Italian filmmakers are like Vittorio De Sica, who made Bicycle Thieves.
okay,
They would make this very kind of hyper realistic film, add in some poetic dialogue, some modern relatability to it for the time, of course.
mm,
You add relatability and a bit of poetry into the film, and I think that's the main the core the core element in Italian neorealism.
okay. That's pretty neat. That's definitely something that I want to check out because I found it to be very successful in this through Godard's work. However, I'll say, and I you know, at the end where we kind of rate the films, I found, I think so far my least favorite Godard film, and I think I found my most favorite Godard so far. But let's start with the movie Weekend, and I'll give you the tough work, Ethan. And would you like to summarize Weekend by Jean-Luc
I
Godard?
will. I will. So, Weekend is about a couple, a bourgeoisie couple that are taking a trip to the countryside to just have a weekend of peace and quiet. But what what it turns out to be is a disastrous weekend full of cannibalism, uh, violence, and horrific, horrific actions between each human in the film, and a whole bunch of car crashes.
Yes. The film is littered with dead bodies and broken down and wrecked vehicles.
It almost feels like an apocalypse movie.
Yeah, I think that is what Godard is maybe trying to realize with this film. I guess just to get to the meat of the matter, did you find this to be a critique of the upper class, a critique of maybe civilization? What do you think Jean-Luc Godard was kind of getting at with his message in this film?
I think he was getting across like sort of the class structure in society, not just that, but just this idea about like sort like the people who have the idea of like controversial politics or like something along those lines, critiquing society. He's almost critiquing people who criticize society in a way, to me.
Mm.
It is over the top. That's
Very much so. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, it is one of the most insane movies I think I've ever seen, which is saying quite a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely takes a look at I guess radical ideals. And let me just throw something out there and let me know if it resonates with you at all. But I think it was also a critique on self-importance. Does that kind of ring true to you at all?
It seems like it because because this couple is going through a lot. I mean, they are just like they start off by bumping into their neighbor's car, and then it begins this long shot of this traffic jam, and it goes from as lighthearted as people just chilling out to just cars flipped over, and it gets progressively more crazy as the long shot goes on. I know this is kind of a long-winded way to get to your point, but I think the self-importance comes from everyone who is acting in sort of a selfish manner, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is acting like it's every man for himself or something along those lines. I'm curious to see what your take is on it.
Well, the traffic jam scene that you brought up is definitely a key example, I think, for that, like my thought process going into that type of critique. And also it is a scene that really stands out, especially early on. There's stuff that is crazier in if you were to explain it to someone, but in execution, watching that traffic jam scene, I have no idea how long it was, but it felt really long. And to do that as a director, it's like it's a kind of a chance to take, because people could be like, what the heck is going on? Like, why is this traffic jam scene going so long? But it ultimately, I think it pays off, because it's like acting in only your self-interest. It's like there's that negative light because, I think there was a fatal car accident that they ended up basically passing everyone, and then they get there and it doesn't really seem to have an effect on them.
Yeah.
And then when you get to the radical kind of people that they meet, they're so convinced that their ideology is the way that the society should be moving, that I think they kind of get lost in the actions that they are proposing and or taking to get to that point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes along with the idea of criticizing people's critiques and how the close-mindedness of those individuals.
Exactly. It's like sometimes the proposition of let's do this, it'll lead to a better outcome, right? It
Yeah.
often there's so many intricacies that and things that get affected by proxy that just get overlooked, and we all are guilty of that, you know.
Yeah. Of course.
But this really shines a light on it, and it makes its point in a very effective way, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. I kind of loved this movie.
See, this was, and like, it's like saying it's my least favorite son. Okay, this is the one that I rated lowest of my Godard films, but I still rated it very positively.
Yeah.
But I still find that at least the points that he made in this film rang the most true. And after kind of seeing other people's takes, it made a lot of sense to me,
Oh
especially
yeah.
for a Godard film.
Certainly. I the reason why I like this movie, again, I think it's crazy, but I don't. I like it a lot. I don't like it as much as obviously Vivre sa vie. Um, but I guess one gripe that I have with the movie is that the characters aren't super well defined. I think the two leads are kind of uninteresting and boring. Um, and that is something that our other movie has, but I will we will get to that when we get to that.
I totally agree with you as far as the two leads. I wonder if that's a writing thing. It probably is that, and also I just don't think the actor and actress had as commanding a presence on screen as perhaps the male and female lead in the next
Yeah.
film.
Yeah, Jean-Paul Belmondo and Anna Karina, which are two regulars of Jean-Luc Godard. They are excellent, but we'll get to that. We should focus on them again.
Yeah, I kind of found them to be a catalyst for all the mayhem going around them,
Yeah.
instead of being intriguing themselves.
Yeah, it's very over the top in the way they communicate that. And I think Godard wanted just to get the whole picture, rather than focusing on the individuals themselves in a
Yeah,
way.
no, I do agree with that. I think they're ultimately like you do have to kind of make concessions, and maybe his thought process was if I really make their characters very intense and like you almost get lost in them, it could be too much to consume as a viewer. I'm not sure if that was a thought process he had or if it was just kind of happenstance. Or what are your thoughts? Do you think it might have just been an error in script writing, or
Um, he might have just been focused on creating that world and creating that atmosphere, that like so crazy that it's almost apocalyptic atmosphere, that it seems that he forgot to write actual characters, or he just didn't want to write characters.
yeah, I do kind of find that to be I do find that to ring true. Like there was some peripheral characters who I thought were much more commanding and much more intriguing with limited screen time.
Oh yeah.
I can't. I think it was the first people who kind of proposed. They were on the trash trucks. Do you remember them, Ethan?
I don't. You would probably need to uh,
They
r-
it,
r-
it was a
remind me. Yes.
it was a black character, and I think he had said he was Islamic, I
Yes.
believe. Do you remember those
Yes.
characters?
Yes.
I love those characters.
Yeah. Well, because they have very they have very specific, rebellious political opinions, and they have ideologies that go against society almost.
Yeah, and that's where the film is really very self-indulgent in what the message it's trying to get across. It starts out relatively subtle, and then it keeps progressing until at the end it just seems like it is just absolutely bombastic and off the wall.
Yeah, and I could see a problem with that because it's just too on the nose. I love the first half of the movie. I think the first half of the movie is great. Um, second half is good. It's just it for me. It maybe falls off a little bit. I don't know about you for that.
Yeah, the beginning felt like it is definitely a tale of two halves, where the beginning you kind of feel like you might know where this is going, and then it goes so off the rails. I almost felt like I was trying to play catch up as an audience member.
Yeah,
I mean,
and it's almost
go ahead. I was just
and
going to ask
and
your kind of
oh
feeling. Sorry.
no, it's fine. It's didn't didn't like one or both of the main characters just die 20 minutes before the movie ended?
I know for certain the male lead did, and then
Yes.
the female lead I think ended up living just like maybe a few minutes longer, and then it was just kind of a story about the like I don't even know what the correct term you could call them, maybe like revolutionaries, or you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, and at the end of the day I think it worked because it fits the tone of the movie, but it gets a little takes a little while to get used to.
I do like I love that in a sense, that as a director doing things like that, like looking at Hitchcock, which precedes this, but
Yes.
the gusto to just say, all right, you thought this was going to be a story about this very famous actress or this character, and then just having the gall to kind of spin it off into its own direction, I really liked. And critique
Yeah.
slash story wise, taking it that direction really really
Yeah.
helped, I think.
Yeah. I think yeah, it's definitely it works. But the problem was afterwards, I think it didn't have enough room to like gather itself up again and kind of go from there. I obviously the most famous example of a movie killing off its main character halfway through is Psycho. That was halfway through the movie, so it had enough time to for things to get back into a different motion. And I
Exactly.
think, um, and also we didn't really care about these two main characters, so I think that's another detriment to where the two main leads are a detriment to the film is the fact that we don't care that much. That might have been Godard's point because the point is supposed to be rebellion and self-importance. But it it felt like just like the last 20 minutes. I didn't think it had enough room to breathe.
It's almost like he made 2 points by doing that. And maybe I'm reaching here, but I want to get your take. The rebellion is doing that, killing off the main characters. It's just it's so nonconformist or unorthodox. And then the self-importance to literally kill main characters is to almost state like these characters or these people, we as people aren't nearly as important as we make ourselves out to be.
That is true. That is an interesting point.
As a whole, I love when a director can really make you kind of look at things through these lenses, and it's great. I think a great film to discuss. He's a great director to discuss.
Yes.
Because of that conversation he can cause.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
So this was one of your top Godards.
Yeah, I think it's top half for me in terms of. I think I watched 6 of them, and it's top half for me.
Yeah. What would you rate this, and then kind of any final thoughts that you have on Weekend?
I was originally, I think I was gonna give it a 4.5 out of 5, but I dropped it to a 4 out of 5 because I know you mentioned this. The killing of animals in movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. It definitely didn't ruin the movie, but I thought that was a little too far.
Yeah, I wanted to warn you just because I knew that was something you really disliked, and it really takes you by surprise.
Yeah.
Despite how wild the movie is, that was like, and it's so quick the way it does it. I think he was doing that for shock factor, in a way.
Mhm.
So like, yeah, I'm not huge on that. It, like, same with you. It didn't ruin the movie for me. But you know, I think it was done as humanely as possible. But
Yes.
whereas
Yeah.
Cannibal Holocaust, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I was it a bull? Is that the scene that you're talking about?
It was a turtle. And
Okay.
the thing is that the only reason why I always bring up the turtle scene and why it always disgusts me is because it is the worst moment in a sea of really degenerate, very demonstrative filmmaking
Mm-hmm.
that I'm just not a fan of whatsoever, and it's very exploitative to me. And so, just the fact that they put that in there in a sea of horrible moments is, I thought was they took it too far. And plus, the animal killing scenes in Weekend are not nearly as bad as the turtle scene from Cannibal Holocaust.
I definitely see where you're coming from there, because the movie Cannibal Holocaust is kind of low rent and a little bit classless. And I'm sorry for people who are fans. I know that has a huge cult following, but
Yes.
what it's I don't even know if that was the director's intention, but like it does come out very clearly that it's trying to paint Native people in a very, very negative light and exploit
Yes.
that for fear's sake. And then
Yes.
doing animal torture or killing, for lack of a better term, is just, yeah, like you said it perfectly. Whereas this, I mean, there is some classiness to the film as a whole, and not
Yeah, there's some artistry.
exactly, and it did feel like there was a point being made, and it could have been done without the killing of an animal, but I think that was maybe the most poignant way at the time Godard felt like he could make that point.
Yeah.
I gave this one, I'm very close to you in rating. I gave it a 3.5. So, and everything else that I've rated is a 4 or higher. But, like, it's a very good movie. I really like it. And the more I talk and see about it, the more I appreciate it, which I think is a sign of, a great movie in my mind.
Yeah, of course.
Let's dive into our next movie, and that is Pierre Le Fou. This one is 1965. It's a pretty wild movie, and maybe
Yeah.
it was just something that I missed. But in summarizing, if one of the distinctions I make, if you saw it a different way, especially if it was kind of something they said definitively, call me out. But
Mhm.
our leading man and leading woman are kind of met by chance because the girl is babysitting for the man, but they have a history together. And from there, and this is kind of the point that I want to get from you, Matt, or Ethan, was this a kind of telling of what they would want their lives to be like if they were to get back together, or was this supposed to be what they really did after kind of, running off together?
Um, that's what's brilliant because there's obviously some narration in the film,
Mm-hmm.
and they're talking about their dreams and just like just general talking. So there's some ambiguity there. It's either a dream or like they could have even been talking in the afterlife. Who knows? I think the narration is used very, very well.
I definitely appreciated that too. And there's even sometimes where they'll like flash back to the car, which makes it like, okay, is this something that they're discussing? They're like, oh, I would, this is the life that I would like to live. And then also like something that I think makes this amazing, and as a whole, I kind of found this to be like looking at films specifically, but also like entertainment, whether it be literature, plays, musicals, movies, a critique on it, and it's done by the characters. And there's even times where, and like Weekend, where they reference like, oh, let's make this like, let's go back to the mystery movie or what have you, which was like really kind
Yeah.
of neat little details added in.
Yeah, this is something that we haven't mentioned with Godard yet, but breaking the fourth wall. He breaks the fourth wall regularly, and this is no exception. In fact, it might be the one that breaks the fourth wall the most.
I really like that as a viewer. It keeps you on your toes a lot, and that kind of meta element makes for an interesting movie. And yeah, like you said, very frequent, and we saw it in both of these films. And did you find this to kind of be a critique on entertainment as a whole as well? And do you think there was even more layers to the onion on this movie?
Yeah, so I wanted to mention the character dynamics. First of all, the two leads are fantastic, Jean-Paul Belmondo and Anna Karina.
Absolutely.
They have great chemistry together. But what I liked so much about their character dynamic is the fact that they're both into different. Their entertainment almost their choice of art medium, kind of transcends their personalities.
Mm.
He's into literature, and he's always kind of head down in his books and writing all the time, and he's kind of a little quieter in a way, um, a little more cool and collective. She is into music and almost dancing in a way, and she's very open and very jolly. It almost seems, and both of them create this really interesting character dynamic.
Yeah, and the movie even kind of commentates on this, where our leading man is more influenced and driven by logic, whereas the leading woman is very much driven by emotion. It creates a really neat character dynamic, and as a whole, it's like that is very true in nature. A lot of people will either find themselves on one side of the spectrum with that. So it was really neat, and I really appreciated that as well.
Yeah, and the way they comment on movies and the way they comment on art as a whole is very interesting, and they use that sort of breaking the fourth wall element to their advantage. Godard does not like he uses the characters as a window for fourth wall breaking and criticizing art.
Mm-hmm. To kind of go to the beginning of this movie, it starts at a party where our leading man is talking to people, and they're almost talking in like company slogans. They're talking about the Oldsmobile. They're talking about, I think, the Aston Martin. They're talking about hairspray. Did you find that to be kind of a critique on how consumerism had infiltrated everything almost so much? And I guess even during that time period, but I mean, now we see that all the time. Is that kind of your takeaway from that?
I think it's Godard using the characters to almost criticize the vapid things that people talk about, and he uses these two main characters as the catalyst for what they hear in their day to day lives, or at least what Ferdinand uh, sees and hears in his normal life in his normal life, um, and the sort of driving point that makes him want to leave with this other woman who's a lot more like him in the regard that she doesn't talk about those weird vapid things.
Yeah, they seem to have an actual genuine connection. And before he kind of returns to her away from the party, he's met by an American filmmaker, and Ferdinand seems really interested in what makes movies work, so to speak. Do you think that was like the launching off point to where this went to what could have been like a dreamlike sequence, a more fantastical, imaginative playing out of what Ferdinand wanted life to be like?
Yeah, that's a possibility. Or American director could be just chilling there. I don't know. It's definitely the more likely thing, and it's a very interesting point.
Yeah. Um, I, the reason it takes off into such a, like, the story ramps up immediately after Marianne and Ferdinand start talking, divulging into their pasts, and what life was like between those two. I mean, we get into, it was so weird because, you know, I didn't really catch it as it was happening. I kind of thought like, okay, well, like this was either what life was like when they dated before, or this was like what happens as they're dating now. But you notice there's like a ton of guns in their room, and then you notice a dead man, and you're like, okay, things are a lot different from what it was like before.
Yeah, absolutely.
To do that, you can tell, like as you said at the beginning of this episode, it really seemed like Godard was just had full license creatively and could really just veer off into many different directions, and it
Yeah.
worked. It worked so well, I thought.
Oh, absolutely. and I like the introduction of the gangsters who are looking for Marianne. Um, like they're the Algerian gangsters who are trying uh to find Marianne and kill her. And I just thought that element when it like came in, it almost came into the film suddenly, and all of a sudden there was this element of danger, even though they felt so alive and free, and now they're being chased. And it's almost like it's critiquing like the concept of danger in film itself.
Yeah, like that. It's. I think you had said like it's very much manufactured. Do you think that that was the point he was trying to get across?
It seems like it, yeah. I do really love the ending. It's it ties in with that element of danger, I guess, and how it almost critiques movies that are like movies with high octane action almost, and that he blows himself up in a fit of wanting to have a an epic death, but he fumbles and he just blows up.
Yeah, and that was there was a few scenes in this movie that actually that made me laugh. That was one of them, and one of the reasons was because it was very thought out the way that he did this, and clearly it was to end in a ball of fury, quite literally. And then he fumbles the matches, but what made me laugh was it led to the same outcome, right?
Yeah, he just blew up.
But he seemed like disappointed that he dropped the matches on the wick for whatever reason, you know?
Yeah,
So it was like, I mean, that's what you were going to do anyways, I guess was what I was thinking, but it that kind of cracked me up. And
yeah,
how crazy a method to do that. It was like,
yeah,
I think it was like a play on he was like literally blowing his own mind. You know what I mean?
yeah. Kind of, yeah, it could be that.
I found that to be intriguing. And then kind of going back to what you said and how like danger was really injected into the film at certain scenes. It went through peaks and valleys where there was like downtime between these two characters, and then they would find themselves in danger's way again. I kind of
Oh
like
yeah,
that flow.
yeah, yeah. It's a nice pace, unlike Weekend, which is just kind of not very well constructed. Whereas Perot Le Fou seems very well constructed.
I completely agree. Like the pacing of this film felt right near where I would say perfect lies.
Yes.
Weekend, it seemed to, even during the exciting moments, it wasn't as high octane as Pierre Le Fou got.
Yeah, because you care about the characters and just their journey is very well paced and well written almost.
Absolutely. And like you said earlier, the chemistry was just, it was top notch. And
Yeah.
I'm glad I got to see, the actor who played Ferdinand and the actress who played Marianne together, because they made for a great combination. Here's a
Yeah, they're
very
different.
oh
Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I have a very specific question for you, and there might not even really be an answer, or it could have
Mhm.
been even answered in the movie, and it just might have went over my head. But Mary Ann again and again referred to Ferdinand as Pierre
Yeah.
instead of, and he every single time he says, "My name is Ferdinand." What do you think that was literally just a nice wrinkle between the chemistry of these characters added in, or do you think there was maybe a specific reason for this?
It could be another parody on those action-packed movies where like you have your average leading man and his girl, his the love of his life, I guess, or not necessarily, but like his subordinate that is like also his love, I guess, and like it's almost critiquing the way um people like address each other in that sense in those types of movies
Mm,
where people always go by their last name, but just calling him his first name is better.
mm. Yeah. Or like the interchangeability of those action stars.
Yeah.
Maybe that was it. And then another just small detail. At the end, we mentioned Ferdinand painted his face blue before he put the, I think it was nitrate, aka dynamite, around his head. What
Yes.
did that seem symbolic to you in any way? I felt like there was a reason. I wasn't sure unless that played into, again, kind of like blowing your mind, or he blew his own mind. I mean, did you find anything else that makes more sense than that?
Um, I feel like when I think of like people painted with blue faces, I think of like a group, like a aggressive group think sort of action
Okay.
where like a riot or a protest or even as simple as a sporting event.
Mm.
Um, something aggressive like that where it's something I'm not so sure, but it's definitely something that someone who's planning to do something drastic would do. So I'm not super positive if there's any specific meaning. It could be a possibility that that it was also a critique on how people like paint their faces or do something strange like that when they're about to do something drastic.
I really like that interpretation because it does speak true. It's like you becoming so invested, and this kind of ties into the critique that we found from Weekend. But you do something as silly and ridiculous, and the way that it's illustrated in this film really brings it to the forefront, to where you can look at the ridiculous of it from an outside perspective, and you're like, well, why the hell is he painting his own face? And then it matches up with the drastic actions that he takes later.
Okay. I did look it up actually, and I guess he did. They might have mentioned it, but he painted himself blue like the ocean because he blew himself up over a cliff over the ocean.
Okay. Um, I can buy that. But as you were saying with Godard, it's the type of kind of conversation sparking little details that really make his films stand out. And like,
Yeah,
I definitely have an affinity for him after watching these two films.
yeah. Which I think it's trying to comment on the poetic nature of the character,
Mm-hmm.
and because obviously poetry is very tied to literature, and he was a very literary guy. So the fact that he did something that drastic, yet something that was simplistic yet poetic in a way, um, I think that is what Godard was trying to go for, just to um, see through it that his character is fits his personality and his like his personality and his traits.
I think, and you were definitely kind of speaking to this. Both characters, their arcs kind of really fit in with the prototype that was created for them, where I think Ferdinand was very much logic driven, and I think his connection to Mary Ann led him to taking such a what would be a emotional response. And he was always
Hmm.
kind of trying to look and dissect like the meaning of life and why things occur and like the beauty that happens from the X's and O's of life. And she rubs off on him, and in my mind at least, and by doing something so big, so grandiose, he breaks from that to find what he was ultimately like looking for. I mean,
That's true.
and I think Mary Ann's actions, she kind of double crossed Ferdinand, does seem to make sense as well because they had been seemingly drifting apart throughout, and you're not really sure where her allegiance lies, and then she ultimately does betray him at the end.
Yeah, it's true.
One last little detail, because getting your perspective ultimately kind of opens me up to look at it from a different perspective, and I think gain a greater appreciation for it. There was a conversation, like, I think right before Marianne went off, fully turning her back on Ferdinand, where Ferdinand was talking to a man who was describing a song and how like three loves of his life rather, either denied him or loved him back. And I guess I just want to get your take on that conversation.
Um, well, memory's a bit fuzzy, but
It is
can
an
you describe?
it's an awfully specific scene, and I for some reason it stuck with me, and I'm sorry for putting you on the spot with it, but they're
Oh, that's
they're
okay.
they're at the dock. The song or music is actually playing in the background. The guy asked Ferdinand, "Can you hear that music?" He said, "This music has been following me my whole life." He says, I heard it on the radio with this lady who I thought was beautiful, I loved, and I was rubbing this side of her hand, and I asked, "Do you love me?" She said no. And then he asked two more women while the song is playing, and the next two say yes. And he's like, "Will you just tell me, am I crazy?" And Ferdinand says, "Yep, you're crazy." And they said, "You missed the point," right before Ferdinand kind of leaves him.
Interesting. Um, I guess it's commenting on different perspectives and different people.
Mm-hmm.
That could be the point in a way. Um, the point is that I like not everybody has the same viewpoint. Everyone has a different viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that could be one. I desperately want to rewatch Parole the Foo. Because I feel like there's so much in it, and it's the longest, one of Godard's longest films.
Yeah, I think a lot of his filmography is probably close to 90 minutes. This one is closer to 2 hours. And it doesn't feel long by any stretch.
No, not at all.
And I think the pacing really plays into that, and it felt very snappy. And I guess just three elements that I really want to highlight because of how well they were executed. I thought the writing, I thought the dialogue, and then like, and I don't know if this necessarily fits into cinematography, but there was some like really picturesque shots that were executed by Godard.
Oh
So,
yeah, the final shot over the cliffside, fantastic.
I just found the whole movie is just littered with like really kind of like iconic shots that are so well done. It almost feels like it could like be like a picture, literally.
Yeah. If there
Um,
is one thing that has stuck in my head and has not left my mind for Pierrot, it's the visuals.
yes. And you brought this up at the very beginning in how this film differs from Vivre à Séville, is that the Technicolor in this film just makes so many shots pop off the screen. It's really
Absolutely.
beautiful.
Yes, absolutely.
I would like to get your rating and any final thoughts on this film.
I gave this film, same as Weekend, a 4 out of 5, but I actually think it's a little better. It's not quite as good as Vivre Sa Vie for me, just because I love that darkness and how the movie just sulks in it, and I love um there were many different moving parts to it
Mm-hmm.
and many different moments that stuck in my head more so than Pierrot Le Fou. But I still enjoyed Pierrot Le Fou, and you know what? I think if I were to give it a rewatch, I'd give it a higher rating.
So, this one is my favorite Godard so far. I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5, and I guess just going into Godard, the stuff that he does and the way that he's able to critique. I mean, he was quite literally a film critic prior to being a director. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I think so. I think most people in the French New Wave were originally critics, like Alain René
Mm.
and I believe Truffaut as well. I believe he was also a critic.
And they come at these films from such a, I guess, a sophisticated and nuanced take. I just love the way that these Godard films unfold, and also how I love the poetic nature in both of the films, and how he's able to relate that in what he's trying to critique to where it comes together in such a brilliant way that I would say I'm definitely a fan, and I think Godard is someone I'm going to be exploring more and more as time goes on.
Yeah, I Godard going into this was a little similar to uh Ozu for me,
Mm-hmm.
where I there were films that I very much respected, but I didn't love as much as other people. I don't think Godard is as revered as Ozu, but
Mm-hmm.
I actually prefer Godard over Ozu. I just think he's a much more interesting filmmaker.
Yeah, where I'm at now, and I would probably I'd have to give Ozu another shake to be able to say definitively, but I'm so there with you that I prefer Godard, and in the way that Ozu feels very dated watching now, I feel like Godard is at the opposite end of the spectrum, and I feel like
Oh yeah,
it's borderline modern in what he does with his films. It doesn't feel
he,
dated.
he is far ahead of his time.
Yeah. And that is why like you can watch his films and it seems like you can see direct inspirations in films now
Oh,
from.
exactly. Like I could just off the top of my head while we were talking, I could just name off a couple influences that even these films have on directors today.
And I love that. It's like you get kind of a weird sense whenever you're like, oh, I can kind of see this in a movie that I remember that I watched from like, maybe 5 or 10 years ago. It's
Yeah.
it's really really interesting.
Yeah. So now I deeply admire Godard and I deeply respect him.
Yeah, same here, and I think he definitely left his fingerprints on the world of cinema. And I think
Hmm.
as a film critic and as a director, that is probably what he would have wanted. So
Yeah. Rest
I'm
in peace, Jean-Luc
exactly.
Godard,
I'm
the
really
legend.
I'm so glad we were able to kind of get to honor him in a sense and
Yeah.
talk about his works. They still feel relevant, which is I think a master work of someone who's pretty much at a genius level of their craft when what they did decades prior is still applicable.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Any thoughts that you would kind of like to wrap this up with on Godard?
I actually watched two other Godard movies in preparation for this. I watched A Woman is a Woman and I watched Content. Both of those, I give A Woman is a Woman a 3.5, and I would give Contempt a 3.
Okay.
Contempt is probably my least favorite my least favorite, just because of its dragged out. It feels dragged out. Not Weekend was dragged out, but it wasn't boring in certain aspects where I felt like Content was a little boring and a little on the nose. But I thought it was very entertaining, and I thought the cinematography was very nice. But with A Woman is a Woman is very interesting. I believe it was his second released feature after Breathless, and you could definitely see like his influence on that film as well. But what is interesting is that there are some very off-kilter musical elements in it as well, and I think that makes for a very interesting movie. But again, one that doesn't have a lot of character personality, not as much as the others that we've talked about.
Yeah. And the musical element, I think, I guess rather, I'm really glad you brought it up because that seems to be something he plays around with in a lot of his movies, where the background music will kind of drown out characters speaking at times. It'll cut in and then cut out real fast. And I kind of love the way that he does that because it makes it very difficult as a viewer to. You really can't let your mind wander too much because he throws things that are so unique at you that if it'll draw you back in naturally. And it's done in such. It's just not done like that. It goes against everything that as a film viewer you're used to and what you would think as a filmmaker, but it doesn't break the film. It actually adds to the experience.
Absolutely.
So, Ethan, I'm so glad that we were able to do this. Godard he's a legend of filmmaking, like we said, and rest in peace for sure. And thank
Yeah.
you for recommending doing this as a tribute to Godard.
Of course. I know you already did a Godard uh, a Godard review, and it wasn't that long ago. But I'm glad we got to honor him.
Yeah, and with a filmmaker who's so kind of diverse, his style is so unique. I think there's always plenty on the bone to kind of digest and consume, and I think that's what makes Godard. I mean that fits him to a T, to where I felt like we were really able to dive into a lot of stuff that is really worth talking about.
Yeah.
So I want to say next week will be week 25, and I'm hoping to have you on, Ethan, for an episode for week 25 because we're going to be celebrating, and I think right now it looks like we're planning to do maybe top 25 movies and then some top directors, and I'm very, very excited about that for sure.
Of course, I got my top 25 ready.
Yeah, I think my top 20 are all very, very definitive, and the remaining 5 is going to be really. That's where it's going to be hard to kind of shake out what cracks in at the very end there. So I'm looking forward to making that list.
Yeah, and those of you who follow me on Letterboxd would know that basically I spoiled it already for people. Both lists, in fact, I spoiled it for everybody. I spoiled it. If you follow my Letterboxd, that is.
Yeah, which your Letterboxd is going to be linked down below. So if you want to get a sneak peek at that, definitely check it out.
But hopefully we can share our thoughts and opinions on our favorite movies.
That's what I think I'm looking forward to the most is just kind of, getting to discuss, shout out the directors and really, kind of give some thoughts on the movies and what resonated most for us. And I think that discussion is what's going to make those lists so interesting. So definitely tune into that. And like I said at the beginning, check out Film Junkie, which is Ethan's YouTube page. It's going to be linked in the description down below. Great analysis. You're going to love his videos and also his short films as well. Definitely check those out. I think you'll really appreciate them.
Yes.
So that's all we have. Also, I'm going to shoot a idea for you in the coming week that we can do in tandem with those top 25 lists. So we'll have a themed episode and then a little bit extra for the fans to look forward to as well. How does that sound, Ethan? That
sounds like a plan.
Hell yeah. That's what I'm looking forward to. Thank you, Ethan, for joining us. And fans, thank you for joining us as well. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And again, check out Ethan's YouTube page, which is Film Junkie, down in the description below. Thank y'all, and we will catch you on the flippity flip. Bye, y'all.